I'm here today to give you a very high-level introduction to ESG. Is it okay, Felicia, if I go ahead and kick off?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Perfect. So like Felicia mentioned, what we're going to talk about today is ESG, why it is or should be important to you, as well as the trends of both the past and what I'm seeing for the present. I hope this gives you at the end a greater understanding of not only what it is, but how to really prepare for it in your own business. So really, fundamentally, what is ESG? There's certainly a lot of buzz around this topic right now, which is typical for something that's new and impactful to businesses. But what I find unique here with ESG is that this is not really a new concept. It's just a new name. In the past, we've called this things like corporate social responsibility, social accountability, sustainability, and so on. Now those fundamentals are under one umbrella of non-financial reporting and ratings. And this buzz and wrapping these items under this one umbrella, it's really drawing so much attention that many people feel ESG is a thing that is here to stay. I think the first place to start really is with getting everyone truly on the same page and getting into that, what is it? So ESG overall is a strategic framework. It's used to identify and assess various activities and objectives within an organization and the way that they operate. These objectives, and activities are considered non-traditional in the eyes of standard company reporting. And that's mostly because they are non-financial indicators of performance, and they're separated into those three main categories or pillars of environmental, social, and governance that I'm going to talk about. So this construct, or this one umbrella, has become increasingly important, not only to the current individuals and stakeholders of the organization, but also and especially to responsible investors, potential clients, and really to the up and coming workforce. The heart of ESG is meant to be about the core foundation and integrity of an organization. And it really does cover a broad spectrum of what a company does and its overall company conduct. So let's cover those three pillars to really put this into context for you and kind of help you understand some of what that really means for you or your business. So first off, the environmental pillar, this is referring directly to the natural world around us. It is typically principled on a commitment towards environmental stewardship in some way, shape, or form. And the considerations under this pillar includes things like carbon emissions, energy consumption, waste generation, resource depletion, and so on. It also encompasses an organization's view on environmental responsibility through varying environmental initiatives, and also through goals that the organization typically places upon themselves. Now, the social pillar is much less about the natural world and more about the people in it. So it's very people-centric. It's reflected through the way an organization treats its stakeholders, and also through the investment that they make in either people or in society. Now, this covers things internal to an organization, such as worker conditions, health and safety, workplace culture, employee satisfaction and retention, as well as things like diversity and inclusion practices. And then external to an organization, there is still a lot of social impact that is reflected through things like stakeholder engagement, which would be investor or customer partner relations, community impact, philanthropy, and really just overall how a company participates in giving back or impacting those communities in which it operates. Lastly, the governance pillar. This is a clear and distinct pillar. It has the most direct overlap with the other pillars. Governance here can be affected by any non-adherence to an environmental or a social standard. And in fact, it really does have a clear and distinct overlap with almost every aspect of business and how it's operated or controlled. So here are some considerations, just so you know what I'm talking about. Those are things like finance and tax strategies, whistleblower and reporting issues, resiliency, anti-bribery, corruption, security, board and executive facts like diversity, structure, compensation, as well as the business's risk mitigation practices. So as you can imagine, this is a rather large and lengthy list. And like I said, it overlaps with most areas of how a business operates. The overlap of governments on these other two pillars, though, is mainly through compliance and internal corporate culture and policies, as well as the overall amount of transparency and accountability to uphold those policies and commitments that the organization is making. So one thing I constantly see coming through in ESG reporting is that the concept of transparency is fundamental to all parts of ESG. Lack of transparency or public reporting of these various ESG reporting metrics can really be of detriment to an organization these days. There's now really been such a heavy-handed shift that if you say nothing, it can also be very negatively perceived. So I always really encourage organizations to take a look at where they want to be in a few years and really dive into exploring how big of a lift that is to make happen, just so that you're prepared for your future and your roadmap. So one thing I do want to emphasize here is also that this is different from organization to organization. It certainly is not a cookie cutter event to implement an ESG program. And that's because it absolutely has to be principled around your commitments to your stakeholders, and it has to be founded within your organization's policies and practices. The prioritization of your organization's ESG efforts can most easily be determined through doing a materiality assessment. And if you're not familiar with the term, a materiality assessment is really designed to identify and understand relative importance of ESG metrics on your organization. So it involves looking at a variety of factors through two lenses. First is the potential impact on your organization. And then the second lens is the importance to your stakeholders. So essentially, your ESG program and what this materiality assessment does is helps you identify the embodiment of what your organization strives to be. So aside from the inferred reasons, why this stuff is important, the world and the people living in it, hopefully is important to all of us, but there are also really specific reasons why it's important to businesses and organizations right now. And I do want to start here by saying there are many more reasons why ESG is important than what I'm going to specifically cover today. But I want to jump into some of the ones that I think are going to be the driving force in the success in your immediate future. So the first topic I want to jump into is how ESG can impact growth and subsequently productivity through investment in your business. I'd be surprised if most of you haven't at least heard of ESG investing or ESG funds in the past. And essentially, this is where people base their investment decisions in part on those 9 non-financial factors, rather than looking at some of the more traditional factors like revenues and profits. Like I said, these are non-financial metrics, and they are related to how the company impacts each pillar that I just spoke about. So the goal of ESG investing is to allow investors to push their money towards things they feel that are good, push it away from things that they feel, should be better in the world. And although I feel, it's needed to start seeing a major shift in the way organizations do business, I also do feel there are some concerns or flaws to how this is being done today. Investors in these instances are pushing to buy more of companies that perform well, less of companies that perform poorly. So in concept, as I mentioned, this should mean investors are able to identify companies that really align with their values, align with their commitments to the world and to society. But what it seems to be lacking right now is a full and clear picture of what the ratings actually mean. And so this takes a lot of control away from investors truly understanding the operations and the impacts of their actual investment. So although I think it's a great first step, it feels like there just needs to be a little bit more structure to be truly impactful there. Nonetheless, I do want to call out that without having a good ESG rating or ranking, or without having one at all, your business can lose out on attracting or maintaining investments in your organization. So something to certainly consider, especially for those either publicly traded companies or companies that are striving to be publicly traded.
Sorry, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, it's 4 a.m. in Elizabeth's time now. 4 a.m. for Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I said, no, I saw you sipping your tea. So I said, sorry for waking you up this 4 a.m. your time.
I certainly have not had my coffee yet this morning.
Okay.
But yeah, so in order to sustain your business, both long-term profit and investment into that is definitely mandatory. And, when you think about investing and you're thinking about maintaining and sustaining your business, really what you're talking about here is both the opportunity side of this and the risk side of this. The opportunity does lie in businesses that have a successful ESG presence, and the risk falls in those who fail to. And I think the investment risk can be a big financial risk for some, like I mentioned, especially newly public companies. So another financial side of this to consider, that's not the potential loss for investment, would be also the costs associated to direct environmental impacts. Organizations like the Climate Disclosure Project, or CDP, those are highly recognized and respected organizations that take the time to understand various risk mitigation processes, as well as the actual financial impact of environmental disaster or environmental threat. They have gone and reported that climate-related weather events alone are expected to cost organizations almost $1.5 trillion by 2026. So when you consider the impact on those affected organizations, when these sort of events occur, so these are, floods, hurricanes, very disastrous large natural events, and you also couple that with that they can't be totally predicted, it is really almost silly not to take preventative measures and risk mitigation very seriously for your business if it can be impacted by these things. Most yearly reports from last year, 2022, haven't been released yet this year, but from what we saw last year, we can expect that about 80 to 90% of the world's largest companies are going to report either physical or market transitional risks related to climate change. And I don't want to bring you too far down the funnel of, risk, but when we talk about transitional risk in that $1.5 billion number, we're talking about a variety of things that organizations are seeing. So transitional risks, when you define that can include things like technology risks, reputation and legal risks, as well as a big one in my mind, which is policy and regulatory risks. And this rolls me right into the next point I wanted to call out that I think is important to your business right now, is that over the last decade, and really in the last 4 to 5 years, there's been a huge increase in the number of reporting disclosures, either suggested or mandated by government entities. I think the last report I read, it was in the upper 70% in the last 5 years. And so, if you're seeing a 70% increase in 5 years in anything globally, that's a really, really big uptick. So the rate at which this is happening is showing a trend and a precedent that is likely to continue to unfold for this foreseeable future. And we are going to see more regulations rolling out in various countries around the world. And the reason why I want to, wrap this into the risk category is because the cost of non-compliance to regulatory standards, if this does become mandatory, could be very steep for certain organizations. And, non-compliance can sometimes cause a complete loss of revenue or operation to an organization. So all of that to say, if you have an inkling or feeling or know that regulation is coming, don't wait to find out what that means to you. Start looking at those materiality assessment and understanding where you are with your reporting journey now as opposed to waiting. So the ESG standards for reporting frameworks and methodologies, they currently are not, items that are mandated or associated to any government agencies, but they are what I feel are the first kind of best step in preparation for regulatory compliance down the road. Some of the frameworks that you could consider here, or what I'm really talking about, are reporting frameworks and standards such as GRI, SASB, TCFD, UNPRI is another big one. There's a handful of others out there that are kind of all lumped into the same category. From each standard or framework, you will see differences, but a lot of what these government entities are looking at are very broad subjects that are covered within these standards. Like I said before, I think these are great opportunities to look at reporting frameworks and understand how to integrate this into your business. And the materiality assessment that I mentioned earlier can also be a big indicator of how prepared you would be to align with one of these standards right now. It also might point out to you some changes that you need to make in order to prepare to report against these in the future. So even if you are not ready to start your ESG reporting journey, that materiality assessment and just understanding where you are in preparation for that in the future is something that I would still recommend doing for an organization. It's my, personal opinion that thoughtful regulation and standards will drive a significant amount of success in the world of ESG. But who holds the crystal ball there? Only time can tell. I feel, though, that it would not only increase transparency of organizations, it would also create consistency of ratings and rankings and really give everyone an overall better understanding of the impact that businesses can have on the planet. I personally believe knowledge is power. That's part of the reason why I'm here speaking with you guys today, is because I believe education around this topic is such a big deal. But this is something where it's clear that society is shifting to caring a lot more about this. And it may take the time for the world to catch up and for government entities to catch up and get on the same page. But I believe the reason why ESG exists right now and why it is such a buzz topic is truly because it aligns with what most people in the world want right now. I think that it gives me a good introduction here to kind of roll into some of the reasons why it's important for top talent attraction and attracting employees to your organization as well. You can find honestly tons of studies about this. And in researching it, it's very evident that top employers, when you look at things like employee satisfaction and attractiveness to talent acquisition, they have a greater impact and higher ESG scores than their peers in almost every case. And what I think is kind of even more interesting about this is that these so-called top employers, they not only perform well in the social pillar of ESG, so those people-centric topics, but they also perform well in the environmental and governance pillars as well. And the studies that I've seen are really interested in, they are conducted through a broad employee survey. They usually have tons and tons of participants, so you can trust and believe in the data. And the trends always read pretty clear that employees do care about ESG, and more so, that they prefer to support and to work for organizations that care about the same issues that they do. So if they care about people and they care about the planet, ESG is typically a topic that an individual cares about.
Having mentioned, sorry, Elizabeth, are you done? I wanted to mention something before we go ahead, just to, I wanted to mention that it can start with you. ESG actually starts with each and every one of us. So I'm going to share something on the chat where you should be able to download that app, check your carbon footprint. It starts with you. It would show you how much of carbon you're emitting as an individual. It would also tell you the carbon footprints the whole world has. It will show you what you are contributing as carbon footprints, and it would help you, check yourself, and you won't waste too much electricity, you won't waste water, and you will not be wasteful, actually. You'll contribute to the environment rather than deplete resources of the environment. So do that, download that app now, and then check your carbon footprint while we go ahead. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, no, Felicia, that is really great to point out. I do believe that awareness and just being conscious of what you're doing and how you're affecting things like climate change, the awareness piece of it is what a lot of people don't have or understand. And tools like this are just absolutely wonderful. So heed Felicia's advice and take a look at that. It's also very interesting to just understand your impact. I think that global society as a whole has become more conscious about this, and that's why you're seeing, tools and things like this come up, because people really do care about things like climate change. The other topics here being, things like social justice and diversity inclusion. Those are other big topics within the ESG umbrella that people seem to be really aware and conscious over right now across the globe.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. For me, until I downloaded this app, until I, saw the report, I didn't really understand what sustainability was. I didn't understand what ESG was. I didn't even know the impact I was making. The mere fact that right now at home, I've got a bin for wet waste. I've got one for recyclable products. I've got one for dry waste. It tells me that I'm contributing something to the environment, because every time it floods, every time it rains, every time it's too hot, it's one thing we have contributed. So thinking like this, looking inwards and not just complaining and saying companies should be transparent or companies should disclose their carbon footprint, we also want to do something as individuals. So this also just helps us to be responsible.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I think that people are taking it, directly from their personal lives. And it's creating this desire for jobs supporting ESG initiatives, as well as a desire to work for organization that talks about ESG and has this principle, really in the foundation of what they do. So again, just to kind of recap what we just talked about and why I think, some of the reasons why I think it's important to your business is really to maintain and obtain that investment, the long-term sustainability of your operations, your financial prosperity, your ability to create kind of an enjoyable workplace culture and attract top talent, as well as creating what many would say is just a better world, for us and generations to come. I'm a strong believer in ESG, obviously, and what it stands for, but I really can't reiterate enough that I believe it should be important to every business, regardless of the industry that you're in, it does apply to you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I think can we take some questions before we go ahead? Because I'm sure people would have questions for us.
Yeah. Yep.
And then the questions that came in as well, we can also take those ones. I'm sure you've addressed those ones in your slides. So if you have any question, please type them in the chat box and we will take them as we go along. So Elizabeth, you can go on and then we'll stop you at some point if we see questions.
Sure, that sounds good. So that kind of the next area that I wanted to talk about is really to just highlight some of the trends I'm seeing. I took a few notes here and have a list, so feel free to interrupt me, Felicia, when you see questions popping up or coming in.
No, the only comments I see here is, okay, I think some people have tried to download, but they're saying the app is not available in their region or country. Okay, maybe I'll give me an assignment. I'll find an app for you because we need to know how much we're contributing to our environment. We have to make a change. Otherwise, our children's children and the next generation would be the ones to suffer for this.
Yep. And at the end, Felicia, I'll share some of the tools that I've seen. And you can kind of reference those back to what you're looking at as well.
Yeah, one question has come in. Sorry, I'm going to be chipping this in. So
no problem at all.
Bear with me. So the question is there a certification on ESG?
Yes, so you can receive specific certifications, and I'm not sure if this question is asking as you as an individual or as a business. So I'm going to kind of take it in twofold because I think it's good for the whole audience to hear. So there are various certifications that you can receive for yourself personally to get into the field of ESG. Some of these things are more broad, like in education, in environmental studies, or a background like that. But those reporting frameworks that I mentioned, like the GRI, SASB, TCFD, UNPRI, those do have specific certificate programs that you can go through and receive, certification of that particular standard. So that's kind of one way to look at it from, a personal perspective if you're trying to get into the market of employment for ESG. Now, on the side of certification for a company or organization, there are tons of ISO standards that fall directly under environmental, social, and governance. And so these would be your ISO standards. I'm going to rattle a couple of them off, and I'm definitely going to miss them here because I don't have these listed in my notes. But the ISO standard 14,000 is your environmental management system. And when you're talking about your environmental management system, like your environmental health and safety of your organization, that's referring to your internal environment of your organization, and not the environment as in the natural world that we're talking about with ESG, but it falls within the social consideration of ESG because it's all about employee health and safety and customer health and safety and things like that. Another standard, for certification within your organization would be the ISO 26000 series. That one's related to corporate responsibility or social responsibility. I can't remember exactly how they have that one tagged. We also do have the quality standard. So anybody who is in, I want to say like a supply chain or a manufacturing setting, if you have an ISO, I think it's 9000 series or 9001, those are quality standards, and those are things that essentially come up all the time in the ESG framework, and surveys asking if if your organization is certified or taking parts in these sorts of initiatives. So absolutely a variety of ways, not only as an individual to be certified in these topics, but also for an organization to start really wrapping their arms around it as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Another question has come in. How can an SME, small medium enterprise, get started with ESG practically?
Yeah, so I'm gonna defer back to what I mentioned before with the materiality assessment. So regardless of the size of your organization, and if you are, small, medium, or large, the first best step in understanding what is the overall scope and what are the priorities needed for your ESG program is going to be that materiality assessment. There's a lot of references out on the web, both regarding service providers of materiality assessments, as well as just kind of how to wrap your arms around doing one internally yourselves. At the organization that I was at previously, we did an internal materiality assessment prior to hiring an organization to do an external materiality assessment. The findings were different between the two, but it was all very insightful. And essentially, what it entails to break this down so that it doesn't sound so overwhelming, especially to a smaller business, is a lot of questions and surveys of your stakeholders. So when I'm talking about stakeholders, I'm talking about the people internal and external to the organization. Essentially, anybody that's affected by the organization could be a part of that materiality assessment. And what it does is it flushes out why ESG should matter to your business. So whether it's that you have a large negative impact on the environment through a manufacturing process, or that you have the need for social justice initiatives within your community, it's going to really call those out to you, and it's going to kind of give you a list of where do you need to start, and how do you create that roadmap or that journey for your organization. So that's definitely, I think, the starting point for every business. If you jump in and you start doing things without that, sometimes you can be misstating your goals or really misstating what your program needs to do because it's not aligned with what your organization needs to care about.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. There's another question here. Someone is asking, how do you develop company safety through ESG? I'm going through the questions that came in before the training so that we can at least address everybody's concerns.
Sure. Can you repeat that one more time?
It says, how can a company manage safety through ESG?
Sure. Yep. So that ISO 14,000 series would be a great place to start. Getting certified in ISO is a little bit challenging if you haven't done it before. It's an extensive process, but it's very, very detailed, especially when it comes to things like employee health and safety. But that standard or reference, so again, that's ISO 14001. And then there's some relation to ISO 45001 as well. Take a look at those two standards and you'll start to get a feel for the types of initiatives that you can be doing within your organization. You know, a lot of it is, in my personal opinion, related to mitigation. And so as far as employee health and safety goes and, you know, on-site operations during the normal workday, it's really about understanding what the biggest risks are for accident and injury, and then working on strategies to mitigate those things. My experience, sorry, I get a little off track here, but my experience has shown that upfront training, and deliberate mitigation of kind of the things that happen most frequently in the organization is the best way to keep solid health and safety records for your employees.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to the next question. The next question here is, how do you deploy ESG as a small business?
I think that's kind of
like an SME. How do you maybe create a strategy, or how do you start your ESG journey?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of a repeat of the question that we just had with the materiality assessment. So I'm going to defer back to that as my response. I really do think it is about doing a materiality assessment. And that, again, that's an engagement with your stakeholders to understand what factors are most important. And then from there, you get that list of factors that are most important to your business. So you have your list of priorities, so to speak. And you really need to do a thoughtful analysis at that time with your business leaders. So your executives, the people who are making the decisions within your organization, to look through those various initiatives and say, how do we put this in the roadmap for our organization?
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Let me get more questions from those that registered, sent in some questions. So someone says, can you share with us actionable plans on how to explore the ESG field?
Yeah, so I would say right now there is really this buzz around ESG. So there's a couple of areas where I'm seeing a large increase in employment surrounding the field. The first is through service providers. So there are many organizations out there right now that are getting into the market of reporting or data or quality assurance. And what I mean by this is that businesses are seeing this tremendous amount of pressure to report these items publicly. And it is, in some cases, a big ask for an organization to gather, collect all this data and analyze it. So organizations are coming forward and saying, let us take that onus off of you and do some of the work and the heavy lifting to make your job of reporting a little bit easier. And so many of those organizations right now I'm seeing are posting and have positions that are available for anyone who's interested in really helping kind of a wide variety of organizations meet their reporting requirements. Now, on the data and quality assurance side, as either an analyst, a financial analyst, anybody with auditing background or experience, I think there's a world shifting into ESG, more on the assurance of reporting side of things. So we're seeing a trend where businesses not only go through and list out the methodologies for how they calculate their reporting, but they're now also having a third party come in, like an auditor come in and make sure that the data and information that's going into that reporting would really stand up to public scrutiny, or some type of questioning that you can prove out and that all the information is valid.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Let us go to it. How do I understand ESG parameters, sustainability methods, and tools? How do I understand ESG parameters, sustainability methods, and tools?
Yeah, so I think a good tool here for that is going to be looking at some of those standards and frameworks like your GRI, your SASB, your TCFD. Some of those reporting frameworks, they call out very specifically what you need to put in a report in order to meet that standard. And so it gives you a good feel for the types of information and the types of data that, one, you need to be capturing within your business or your industry, as well as kind of gives you actionable insights into what these things actually are and what the parameters, are actually being placed under these organizations.
Okay, we have 10 questions. We've done about 3 because the second one I see here is a repetition of one you've done already. But the next one says, what is the difference between ESG and CSR?
Yeah, so the difference between ESG and CSR is really, I don't want to actually say that there's a difference between them. So I'm going to explain it a little bit differently. Corporate social responsibility oftentimes was related to the people aspect of the world and the policies that govern people within an organization. And so it had some influence over what is now the S and the G portion of ESG. So really, corporate social responsibility, or CSR, it has been lifted and created more of this broader, it's under this broader umbrella, but it hasn't gone away or changed in any way. It's just now part of something a little bit bigger.
Okay, I can chip in something there. I have an understanding that ESG has to do with how we protect the environment, while CSR is about, it leads to protecting the environment in some way, but CSR is just organizations trying to do something for their communities. So we have to strike a balance here, so we're not just doing greenwashing. A lot of companies do CSR so that they can create an awareness for their brands, they can get more customers. So ESG has actually come to help us put, to set those boundaries, to know we're doing this because we have to do it. We're doing it because we are conscious of our environment. We're doing it because we're concerned, not just because we want to attract customers. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. You said that very nicely. One thing I oftentimes hear people say is, we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And, just hearing that organizations and people alike feel that way, it's very uplifting.
Yes, and especially now when it comes to talent attraction, a lot of young professionals want to join organizations that are concerned about their mental well-being, organizations that put their needs first. So this is also part of ESG. They want to put their payroll. Most people want to work from home. Most people don't want to spend time commuting to work. So I think it's a good difference between ESG and CSR. So let's go to the next question.
Sure.
Someone wants to have a better understanding on ESG metrics and then how to set priorities for reporting standards.
Yeah, so ESG metrics, I'm really going to guide you back to those reporting frameworks for the ESG metrics. And the reason why is because within the 3 distinct pillars of E, S, and G, you cover almost every aspect of how a company operates. So some of the things that would be in the E pillar, some of those metrics would be things like the number of kilowatt hours of electricity that are being consumed, or the amount of fuel that is being burned, things of that nature. Now, the social element takes a drastically different shift, and this is all of your metrics related to human resources. So not only how many employees do you have, What is the ethnicity and diversity breakup of that group of people? All the way down to the policies that you have to govern people, or, to even govern when the lights come on or off, depending on how your organization is set up. And so ESG metrics and what we're actually looking to capture within this reporting is almost every non-financial indicator of how a business operates that you can possibly think of. And, I know that sounds maybe like a very broad answer, but once you start to look at these frameworks, you can really see that there is this deliberate means of kind of creating this all-encompassing view of who an organization is, so that people, both consumers, employees, but also, investors and people out in the public really have an idea and understanding of who you are and what you're doing in your business. And then it's kind of a take it or leave it situation. They can either participate and engage with your organization, or they can choose someone else. But it's really about this foundation of kind of showing your secrets on a broad level of things. And it's very interesting because it does create some transparency in the market between competitors, and sometimes even collaboration between competitors because of things that end up coming in these reports. Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Someone wants to have an understanding of how ESG can affect the productivity of his or her business and growth.
Yeah, so as far as productivity is concerned, and growth, I think, one of the things I covered earlier was through investing. That's a huge area of how, especially companies that are starting up, they're getting investment into their organization. Companies that are moving to being publicly traded, again, that there's a big push for investment into the organization. And so I think that can have a really, really big impact if you don't have those good ESG ratings and rankings. That overall investment, just, upfront initial interest in your organization could potentially be less. But I also think, just from a standpoint, and I know that this is very different. In my last role, I worked mainly with people that were in either the UK or in the United States. And just between those two countries, there's a lot of differences in the way that we operate and we think about just working through the world on a day-to-day basis, and really allowing organizations to see and understand their impacts and kind of how they're impacting those communities in which they operate, is something that, if you're not conscious of those things, you are not going to be attracting the talent to your organization, attracting the sales of your organization, things like that, which means that your business will not be sustained long term. So when we talk about this idea of sustainability, oftentimes people think it's environmental sustainability, right? They're thinking about green initiatives and kind of just the E portion of ESG. But when you really think about just sustainability as a whole, it is to sustain, it's to keep things moving. And so ESG is a part of keeping your business going. And so I think that without kind of considering these things being fundamental to your business, making sure that your processes and what you're doing are effective, efficient, non-wasteful, those are all things that can really negatively affect your growth and productivity if you're not paying attention to them. And so I would say that that's kind of the first best step in really understanding where your organization is on their, sustainability, both in the green sense of the word, but also, in how long you can sustain keeping your business this way.
Someone is asking, what are your insights? Can you give us insights into volunteering opportunities in the ESG field?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I always love hearing people have interest in volunteering. Really, any sort of volunteering is considered in the ESG related field. So it would fall under the social umbrella of ESG. And most often, we're seeing this talk about in the sense of what businesses do. But what you'll see is a lot of businesses nowadays, or a lot of employers, I should say nowadays, are allowing their employees to go back and contribute to society, and participate in things like giving back, volunteering, whether it's through donation of food, money, time, what have you. These organizations are allowing individuals to take part in the activities that matter most to them, while still getting paid through their employer, which I think is just absolutely wonderful to see. But I think, like I said, any volunteering opportunity really is part of ESG because it would fall under the social realm. I think the question is probably specific more to like the environmental side of it. There are organizations out there, and it's going to be different from whatever community you're in, but there are organizations out there that you can go and find that do things like planting trees, all the way into studying things like clean energy technologies. And so it's definitely going to be more local to your area on the environmental side of it. Usually with things like that, you don't see long distance travel as a part of that as a negative environmental impact. And so I'd be looking first in your own community to see what sort of environmental initiatives. There's typically always a cleanup, waste cleanup, tree planting, things like that. There's always those things going on in local communities usually.
Thank you. We'll just take 2 more questions and then we're done.
Sure.
Question is, what's the future impact of ESG on businesses and the environment? I think you've touched on a bit of that, but you can just elaborate some more.
Yeah, so I think that, there are a couple of trends that I've seen over the last handful of years. ESG has been a really big topic in the eyes of businesses, especially publicly traded businesses. Over the last 4 or 5 years, there's just been this huge uptick. And I think that, some of what I'm seeing and how this is going to be impactful to businesses are related to it, directly to the trends that I'm seeing. So one thing I want to call out is that the COVID pandemic overall has created a lot of changes and a lot of need in the social and governance elements of the ESG framework. And I think that it's directly impacted because employee expectations are now kind of setting the standards for the policies and procedures of the organizations in which they work. And this, I believe, is due in part to, people just in general and the flexibility that has needed to be provided to an employee or to their family during the time of illness or even loss. We've essentially just seen this kind of weight shift to employees having a little bit more power over their employer. And I think that that's something that we're going to continue to see over the next coming years. I don't think that's something that will ever go away, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for answering those questions. So I'm going to be posting something in the chat box for those of us who will be interested in more trainings by TBL. Let us know. And if you have any question, please do let us know. Paul, please, you want to paste it in the chat box? I need to just go through Elizabeth's profile again for the benefit of those who missed it when I did that the first time. So Elizabeth Carroll is a global business professional with more than 15 years of experience in the MRO space and in the B2B distribution space. Primary areas of focus for Elizabeth reside in corporate finance, technology, business intelligence, and stakeholder engagement with a culminated focus on environmental social governance, ESG. Her passion to drive change through helping businesses meet their ESG and sustainability goals align with her ambition toward volunteerism and community impact. Elizabeth resides in a rural community in Minnesota, USA, with her husband and 2 young children. There, she hopes to encourage growth towards sustainable living while working in her business and professional life to help businesses understand their impact, create meaningful goals, and execute them effectively while navigating the ever-changing landscape of compliance and regulation surrounding ESG. Elizabeth, thank you once again. We appreciate you for coming, for taking this session. I don't know if you still have other things to share with us. If anyone has any question, you can just type it in the chat box because we don't want to take too much of our time. We said 11 o'clock and we want to.
Yep, absolutely. I just like to say thank you all for coming today. ESG is a complex topic. I know we covered a lot of things. I'm very excited for you guys and your potential collaboration with Talent Bureau Limited for more educational opportunities in the future. I would really highly suggest that you reach out to Felicia and her team and start talking to them about your training needs. They've been a great organization to work with. And I believe that they'll be really flexible in providing you really what you need to get this ESG concept under you. So thank you all again for your time.
Thank you. So I've shared something in the chat box. There's a link. There's a link in the chat box. So please click on that link and check for training, news and training. Let us know what your needs are. Thank you, Elizabeth. And please go, you can go back to sleep now because
it's about time to get the kids up.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day.
So let me just share. I'd like to share. There's a PowerPoint slide I'm supposed to share for those who want to follow us on Twitter, for those who want to link up with us on social media, really. So let me just share my screen. So follow us on Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram. I'm sharing my screen. And then you can feel free to call us. Our numbers are listed there. 0814-240-7344, 0814-240-7343. Thank you everyone for coming. It's a work day, so let everybody get back to work. Let's be responsible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
You're welcome.